Okay, thank you very much, Ed. That was an excellent setting out of ideas, steps, what we could do, how to present it. I'm going to open it up now for comrades to respond, add, disagree. Don't hold back. I'm just going to throw one question that's already appeared online. That's from Richard Harris. How can we know what, quote, level of agreement exists, end quote, until we have sketched out what our programme might look like? A minimum programme in length, not in reformist demands. So we'll just throw that into the discussion. So Vic, I see you. Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks. Just on that question, now I would agree that a mass communist party should be based around the unity of a programme, a minimum maximum programme. That would be democratically developed in a way that reflects the democratic nature of that organisation. And just on Ed's contribution there, and I agreed with lots of it, and with his end proposal around the need for talks between the existing left, and particularly around shared commitment to work together, because I think that's important in terms of building good faith, particularly amongst the rank and file of those existing groups. Considering our numbers and resources of those of us on the British Marxist movement, I think it's just politically unserious to say that you should not seek to unite the Marxist left in this country, to unite the thousands of those who call ourselves Marxists in the country. The idea that we should not do that is just unserious. The idea we should appeal directly to the masses, and out of that you would build a mass communist party that we have not seen in this country for many, many, many decades. Again, it's just unserious. So just to return to Ed's point on shared commitment of work, I think that's important. Like I said, building that good faith between Marxists, between those of us who are in different organisations and outside organisation as well, building a culture where polemicising, debating, arguing is actively encouraged, where factions are actively encouraged, because that's how we all learn politically, and that's how an organisation develops, rather than splitting. And I think that is incredibly important for an organisation to do. And a commitment to political education, and to thrash out these questions of what is a party, what's a party for. I see it as an organisation where shared activity happens, but at the same time it's challenging the power of the capitalist state and seeking for the working class to take power. So over the last few months, there's been a series of events in London at Pelican House called Party Time. Now, I think it's within our reach for those of us who are seeking to build a mass communist party to do something similar in the Northwest. So I think that's something we should aim to do. Now, Ed said that left regroupment is going to happen. That alignment of the left, particularly post-election, is happening. So we need to be ready with our ideas. And whether that's politically intervening in a formation, we've got to consider what our orientation is on those questions as well. I just thought my final point is, I was part of a group called Strike Manchester, which ran for a few years in the city, and we use that as a space to bring together communists and socialists across the city, inside and outside organisation. That was overwhelmingly a positive experience. It was good to sort of meet people from different groups and start discussing those base ideas around Marxism. But however, where it failed was that it was just not connected to a wider political project, and that's the piece missing, isn't it? The need for a mass communist party. It's not just enough on its own to have meetings. It's got to be connected to that long-term communist organisation that challenges the capitalist state.
Thanks, Vic. Thanks very much. Even small questions are important, they can spark debate. What do people think about Ed's setting out the stages and the process? Too ambitious, not ambitious enough, impossible. You'll never get Marxists to work together in the same organisation. Kat?
Yeah, I'm not really that much to say. Sorry, I'm just kind of mulling on because it was really good thinking. I really appreciate it. It's obviously just a lot to think about, isn't it? I mean, I agree with the stages that you set out. You know, like it kind of reflects to a degree what the CPGB outlined in sort of like the mid-90s. The idea of how recruitment would happen would be this kind of Ollie might disagree with him. The sort of a process of initial regroupment amongst those where you have very close agreement of the tasks in front of us. Obviously, I think maybe through more recent discussions I've had with the CPGB, I don't know if that's still how they conceive of it happening, or whether for them maybe it's dependent on some larger formation emerging that you then make an intervention into. But I think it's certainly in the 90s, from at least how it appeared to me, was that regroupment would be something that you take like an active orientation towards regrouping those who have a high level of agreement, particularly around the organisational tasks in front of us, which I certainly in this period agree that this is, you know, or at least it looks like there is potential in front of us with respect to that. I don't think it will be an easy process for many of the reasons that you outlined, many of the challenges that you outlined. I think it's something that we can do, but obviously we just have to be prepared for the challenges that will come with that. I guess whether or not it looks exactly like that, as you said, it depends on how things develop. I mean, I know, for example, you know, obviously a lot of us are not who share this project are not in organisations. Some are in organisations like TAS or the CPGB, but then there are others, for example, those in RS21, who are within a larger organisation where they're able to kind of organise and argue for their politics. And I suppose I don't know how that fits into that process, because those, from my perspective, those comrades are doing excellent work in what they're doing. And I guess, you know, maybe it doesn't look like a linear process. Maybe it's going to be a continued process of regroupment as things develop. But certainly, I suppose, as you outlined, convening talks between those who agree on the need for a mass communist party organised on a democratic basis. Convening those talks doesn't necessarily result in everybody involved in them immediately fusing into an organisation, but it certainly lays the basis to begin common discussion, common work, begin to clarify and thrash out some of those political differences, and that, you know, that is, you know, at least from my perspective, quite clearly a positive step forward to where we need to be going, and what might result from that. Not necessarily going to be clear cut, but it still absolutely would be a positive step forward. Yeah, I don't have a massive amount to say. I took a lot of notes and I'll think over it. But yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. I've got another point here from Richard. The focus on the existing fourth international influence left will be a barrier. The SP, brackets, clue is the name, close brackets, and the SWP think they are the party. We'd have to have made great independent progress first, and then he's posted a second thing, but I think there's a limitation on the number of characters in a comment on YouTube chat. We'd have to have made great independent progress first before they'd even notice us. They don't talk to Weekly Worker and had no real contact with the original CPGB. Just again. So it's good to get the chat from people who are watching the discussion outside. Ollie.
Well, you wouldn't want the leaderships of those organisations. So the leaderships of those organisations aren't particularly interested in talking at the moment. That's sort of by what you would expect, isn't it? So it's about and I don't think it would even be as simple as just whittling away from those sects and establish Fourth International Left. I think he said. No, it's a messy process. It's splits and mergers. CPGB is an example. The original one in 1920 was used as an example in the first session. That was bloody messy. And working on a book project on that, and it's sort of a flow chart of all the different groups and splits and mergers that are involved. And like I said, it looks like someone squished a spider. It's just everywhere. Bits and bobs. So it'd be complicated, and so I agree in that sense with what Kat was saying about maybe it's linear like that, maybe it's not. But as for the established left groups and sector at the moment, you wouldn't. maybe some of the leaderships will see the light, but I think a lot of it's about like I say, splits and mergers, and we're seeing quite a lot of, in some organisations, some healthy moves within some of those organisations. I mean, RS21's been mentioned, so there's some healthy stuff there, but also just generally there's the importance of not just sort of, and this again, I think it's where I agree with something Kat was saying maybe about the weekly worker CPGB sort of approach at the moment of sort of propaganda, waiting for the next big thing, but in the meantime, it's propaganda and slightly, thing about sort of letting people go through the sects first and then sort of, trying to pick up the pieces afterwards. But also, no, at the same time, where there's new shoots in the movement, you don't just want to, ignore that, just focus on the established left, but I think it's a bit of both is important in that regard. So a very active strategy, I think, is the best one. I think you use Nick urgent patient. I'm not sure about that. It's a bit too close to
patient urgency.
Mike McNair's revolutionary patience. I'm not quite keen on that. So maybe a disagreement there. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. Well, you've got a fan. Richard Harris says, "Right on, Ollie."
There you go. Wow,
it's good.
Action underway already.
Soraya.
Flowing on from what Ollie said, I think that it's certainly in my experience of trying to unite with as many people as possible, Marxist socialists over the decades. Socialist Alliance. Forgive me if I haven't got this in the right order, even though I participated in them. I can't remember them. Socialist Alliance, Respect, Left Unity. The I remember whichever was the first, and I think it was Socialist Alliance. So, yeah, being really pleased that I was working with comrades. So on the ground, local comrades from Socialist Workers' Party, who for years, my leaders, my experience, the party I was in, so I've been in the militant, I think, can't remember if that stage I still was, but anyway, and so they were the enemy, and we were right, and everybody else was wrong, and so they were the enemy, and then you discuss with people, and there wasn't a lot dividing you at all. If anything, I'm talking about local, talking to people on the ground. So for me, everybody is an ordinary member, but you've got leaders, haven't you, who raise themselves above, often in an undemocratic way. And it was the leaders who didn't really want that sort of unity, and so then it didn't continue for various reasons. I'm really not going into the details of this, and I don't want to be unfair to anybody, but my experience was that. And so I personally want to work with as many people as possible, because of course we are so few, and how do we become the many? But the problem is that you've got in various, I'm going to call them grouplets, because sadly not been able to build much. That's not me denigrating, because I've been a part of groups. But the way to build unity is not by denigrating others and saying, we know, we've got the answer, you come to us. I'm not suggesting anybody here is saying that, I'm just commenting on my own experience. And that's the problem, isn't it? If you've got leaders, I think the only thing you can do is discuss in a comradely way with the members, and not how. I mean, the problem you've got, and I think probably, well, I'm picking out one in particular of the groups, but in particular, in my limited experience with the CPGB, they've got very little, but they talk as if anybody else is really stupid, and I don't think you're going to win anybody. Firstly, I don't have that attitude, probably because I couldn't possibly judge anybody else to be really stupid. But because you if people haven't reached the conclusions you have, and you think you're right about those conclusions, then my view is you try and persuade people in a comradely way. You don't tell them they're stupid or they don't understand anything, and you better just listen to what I've got to say. And so that's, I think it's trying to bridge in terms of steps of getting together. Then I hope that if it's done in a comradely way and no sort of superiority from any particular people, that's the way to build and get to a later stage. Because I don't think it's a question of for me, it's not advocating that we need a new, I think as Nick said, sorry, as Ed said, a new broad left party. We need a mass party of the working class, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be incrementally that we will become the party. It's just building a nucleus to be able to participate in the events that the working class will, I hope, come, and be a part of building that mass party, which we desperately need.
Thanks, Soraya. Chris, just 1 second. Do you mind me putting this on you?
No. Just forgot to say masks.
There we go.
We're in the right place. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, I'll say that I'm in anti-capitalist resistance, which some describe as one fourth international sect. And I think the use of sect is interesting because, of course, everybody uses it about all the other groups. So, by majority vote, we're all in sect, even though we might not accept that ours is. No, it is funny how often that word comes up, and it was funny here, I guess, from this afternoon. One thing, just the very start of your contribution reminded me, because I say this endlessly to my comrades. Before the Socialist Alliance, there was the network of Socialist Alliances. And everybody's knocked that out of the history book, so it never gets analysed. But what it actually was a series of small localised socialist groups who had come into existence up and down England. I think there was a sort of linked organisation. There was a linked organisation in Wales called Ligon. And there was also the organisation that eventually became the Scottish Socialist Party, right, in Scotland. But the distinctive thing about that was that it was all these groups of people and all sorts, and every group in every town was different. So the Greater Manchester Socialist Alliance came about because a number of people had gone to look at the Socialist Labour Party and realised that was absolutely going to be awful, which is exactly what happened to the Scottish Socialist movement, the subsequent beginning of the Scottish Socialist Party. There was little groups like the Leicester Radical Alliance and the Preston Radical Alliance. And then there was the Coventry Socialist Alliance, which was built around Nellist's expulsion from the Labour Party. And then there was one in Kent that was really bizarre. They had a Socialist Labour Party meeting, which the people in the meeting rejected during the Socialist Labour Party, but thought working together would be really good. And so what you actually had was a whole string of towns right across Britain, in fact, if you included Cornwall, the Scottish Socialism, who were all looking around for something that was broader, inclusive, and whatever. It came a cropper, which is where most people's history normally begins with the Socialist Alliance, because in fact it became really obvious, except in Scotland, from very early on, that we had to put a lot of effort into getting the SWP involved, and we all knew that was probably also a death knell simultaneously. There was almost overt discussions. We realised we'd gone as far as we got with this network of socialist alliances, and it was the next steps. Didn't work out in the way that has been described, and it was to do with the SWP. Now, just to go back to the SWP again, in the mid-70s, the International Marxist Group, which I was in at that time, tried to argue for a merger with the Socialist Workers' Party. It was after IS, the Socialist Workers' Party. And that, parts of that were really, really positive, because effectively we split what you jargon middle cadre on that question. The leadership of the SWP was totally hostile. The rank and file kind of almost didn't know what was going on. But in fact, the branch leaderships and people like that were really, really quite interesting. They were fairly evenly split as far as we could tell. But of course, the national leadership could use just the paying members, who weren't particularly well organised, to vote it down when it came to their Congress. So I say that to sort of highlight how difficult that kind of things can be, though Congress have talked about it. I mean, I like Ed's introduction loads, because not quite as schematized as you did it. I mean, this is a conversation that I feel I'm involved in every week inside my organisation. What's the next step? Who do we want to be converted? And I think, the things that you're posing are absolutely dead right, because like I said, that's the kind of thing going on with us. I think they are highlighting the difficulties. One difficulty I talk about from my experience, and it's something that my history of Fourth International groups, the International Marxist group, through to anti-capitalist resistance, has always struggled with the fact we've always been so rooted in the actual struggles that the comrades are doing, be it trade union, be it women's liberation, be it whatever it's been over the decades, that we've actually always underdone the party building. That is an overt self-criticism that we have of ourselves, because it's really hard to get that balance right, because you get comrades join the organisation because they really like the overall ideas, but they're really active in this campaign or this trade union or whatever it is. And I think we would agree that we've never got it right in terms of that balance, and we've underdone the party building jargon that we should do it. One last comment, which is on factions. I think they threw this in. We were always really, in the international Marxist groups back in the 70s, back in the 80s, there was a very clear structure of tendencies and factions. You were almost expected to be in one at the time of conference, right? Because it organised and structured the debate in a very useful way. And I remain a fan of that way of doing things. But it can end in disaster, and for us it did in the 80s, as first one and then another tendency became a faction and then went off. So it isn't a straightforward, easy thing. I think it's an absolute positive tool for internal debate, absolutely. But it doesn't mean you're going to get to that end that you want to be at. And I would say partially there was personality stuff in it, but at the bottom it was political perceptions that were shifted. That made it impossible to hold, very difficult and then impossible to hold things together.
Thanks, Chris. So, in terms of Ed's introduction, I thought it was excellent. As I said, I opened the discussion, very well laid out, very clear. I pretty much agree with it. Obviously, like any war plan, it's got to be flexible, and you change it as it develops, and things get put back, things get speeded up, new things happen, so you discuss and you change your orientation or whatever. I don't know enough about the CPGB's present attitude towards recruitment or the things that Kat and Ollie were saying, so I can't really comment on that, although it sounds a bit passive if it's waiting for a new organisation on the broad left to be set up and then intervene in that. That sounds a bit passive to me. But clearly, as both I and Ed said, we both expect something new to be set up, whether it does come into existence or not. If it does, we need to relate to it. My approach is that we need to relate to it as clearly as possible, as a coherent organisation, as much as possible, with political argument. And that would also now be my attitude to the points that Chris is raising about what happened in the 1980s with the various local socialist alliances, because they would have been basically collectives of the left outside of the SWP and the Socialist Party. And it would have been very much a mishmash, a mix of different types of ideologies, similar to what I described this morning, probably mostly social democratic, leftish ideas, some ex-members of far left groups and so on. I'm not in favour of organisationally getting involved in that stuff. I'm involved in presenting material to that audience, which takes up the arguments and discusses with them in a comradely way. Marx's approach in the First International, I can't remember the Latin phrase, but it was soft in tone, firm in principle. So basically, these are allies in the labour movement. We want to persuade them of our ideas, so we engage in comradely debate and discussion. And some will persuade, and others we won't. But the more coherent we are around the objective of a new mass communist party, the more we'll be effective in engaging in that. If you think about it, we've got 3 different websites, or possibly 4, who knows. One, with everybody writing for the one, is a far more effective way of presenting your communist ideas than having it spread across 4. If we can't do that, we can't do that. But if you look, in terms of the existing left, you could pick up the RCP paper, The Communist, and read it, and you think, I really like that article. There's probably nothing in that article I disagree with. You read another one, you think, okay, I disagree with quite a bit of that. But the point is that they've got skillful writers, they've got experienced cadre, they've got people that can write. The same goes for the SP, the same goes for the SWP. You're all coming at things maybe in a slightly different way, but you could read an article on the state and it would be very similar. You can read an article on the Russian Revolution, it will be very similar. It's an unnecessary duplication of writing, of resources, and to an extent, it's not difficult to imagine that actually the bureaucracy of the party almost have an inbuilt reason not to merge into a united communist party, because perhaps their position as a bureaucrat in the existing party that they're in becomes threatened. I don't know. That's not the way that it should be looked at. It's what's the most effective way of prosecuting socialist or communist ideas. So we need more discussion between those of us around Taz and Prometheus and the partyists and, if possible, the CPGB and others. I think that it's extremely important to put out the demand or the call for the existing Marxist lefts to seriously consider and take steps to form some sort of stages towards forming a united Communist Party. I think that's a really important programmatic or organisational demand, because it shows to the working class that the Marxists, us, are serious, and we want that to happen. The onus then is on those organisations to decide how to respond to that. They can do what Alan Woods did at the RCP founding conference and poo-poo the weekly work or the CPGB, and people can make up their own mind about that. But if that's what we think objectively is needed, then we certainly should call for it. And if it doesn't happen, we then just have to keep. And I know from my own individual experience that there are people, for example, in the SP, who are watching what we're doing. I've got no doubt that the more we write, and the more that we put up our videos, and the more we show the discussion of a serious nature, even though there's a few of us, it will attract, it will interest. And people will, okay, well, you know, there's not very many of them, but maybe they've got something interesting to say. And maybe they'll start raising ideas within those organisations. And, you know, don't they have a point? What is the difference between us and the SWP? You know, does it really matter that they say state capitalist and we say workers' state? I mean, what's the relevance of that to a programme now, in the here and now? Or the point that I mentioned, and I know of people, I think Ed might have said this, you know, people who were basically driven out of the socialist appeal because they were tendency of rate of profit people, and it didn't fit in with what they wanted to emphasise. A communist party should have space, should it not, for workers and, you know, I don't like, yeah, workers who are interested in ideas to go away and research those ideas and come up with, I've researched Marx on the state. This is my take on what Miliband said. This is my take on what Kalantzis says. I don't agree with this, or I don't agree with that. Instead of saying, no, you're wasting your time, don't read that, read our stuff, encourage it, because it will only, out of that debate and that discussion will come progress. So my experience is the same as Soraya in terms of the Socialist Alliance at one stage, and it was horrifying to see the Socialist Party walk out when they realised they were no longer going to just have their party. But the SWP did exactly the same for their own. They've all got this idea that we are the party, and the rest of you, if you're not in our party, you're irrelevant. I had a conversation, I think I've told some of the comrades here this, I had a conversation during the Corbyn years with a member of Socialist Appeal on Facebook, and it was about Marxism, and it came down to me saying, so are you saying that because I'm not in the Socialist Appeal, I'm not a Marxist? And the answer was yes. So it's that sort of level of stupidity. We've got to be beyond and above that, and I think trying to set out some staging posts. So I'm hoping that out of the discussion between Taz and Prometheus, we can organise maybe another meeting like this with, you know, more people, you know, organise it well in advance so that people who attend the Taz video Zoom meetings can prepare and come along to it. That would be good. Obviously, they found it difficult. But yeah, there's no reason why we couldn't meet the targets that Ed has not tentatively but quite seriously put forward. So I'm in favour of that, and putting some concrete steps together. So hopefully Prometheus and TAS can have a discussion. We can discuss, you know, what the attitude of the CPGB is to this sort of thing. We sort of need, I don't know, I don't want to coin a name for it, but we sort of need a campaign for a mass democratic communist party. That's not a particularly good title for a campaign, but there we go. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to propagandize for that. If we're serious, we want unity. I don't underestimate the difficulties in it. precisely because each of us that's come with experience and background have learned to do things in a particular way, become habituated in it. Sometimes those habits are great with somebody whose habits are different, but actually not incompatible with Marxism, and they may irritate, but we have to overcome the things that are irrelevant or secondary and concentrate on the things that are important. And the thing that is important is the program. And if we can agree on a program which has got the maximum program, I personally don't talk necessarily in these terms, maximum, minimum. I don't advocate the transitional program. I think that what we need is a party program for government, which you would not take government unless you were able to implement it. Maybe that's what other people mean by the minimum maximum. But if you share the idea of the need to abolish capitalism and presenting a program for what you would do if the working class took power, then and you agree with that, you may not even call yourself a Marxist, but why not be in that party? And we can educate people and we can discuss, and we're open. And historical, which side would you have taken on a particular debate in a trade union in 1905? I mean, it's of interest. I'm very interested in history and theory and so on. But if you agree on the program, or you can accept the program, then why not be in the party? And if you then disagree on other things, okay, let's have a debate about it. It will only raise the level. Proceed. Does anybody else want to come back in or come in? Okay, unless there's any. Alistair.
I've heard for decades now people saying about how we need to have democratic organisation, organisation. What's always lacked in this conversation is like, what does it actually look like? How does this actually function? What are the pitfalls of the past? How do you learn to correct them? Because any organisation only exists at a certain point in time. And at any point in time, there'll be different tendencies and problems in the movement, class, everywhere else. So organisations will look democratic in a different kind of way. But what would this democratic organisation look like? How does it do? And I've always heard lots of people saying democratic, but I've always had very little detail on what this actually, the practicalities of this, or what lessons in the past have told us what we should do.
Okay, great.
It's always very vague. This is trying to be democratic because we say we're democratic, but that's it.
Okay, very, very good, sharp report point. Does anybody want to take that up? Steve?
So I think there's a couple of things that were kind of mentioned in relation to that, I think, or one of which is, of course, like the presence of open factions, so that people can organise around positions and it be, in a sense, like the strongest version of that position within an organisation, rather than it just be one person in a conference every year, getting a point for 2 minutes before whoever the big head honcho of a group is can shout at them for 10. It's having an actual, a very clear, open organisation around certain political positions that can come and go as and whenever. I'm not sure whether everyone will agree on this, but one thing that kind of, in my opinion, is something is rotation of roles and responsibilities kind of regularly, including ideally, what I suppose you'd call like full-timers within most organisations. Having that not be something which is kind of like personally, my relationship with full-timers was very sort of incredibly sort of, these people are basically paid to tell you what to do, essentially, about in any sort of situation, or to, when people have gone a bit off track, they can tell you to sort of shut up and take the right position. And having something that's not like that, which isn't kind of where people are rotated in and rotated out, where it's practical, of course. To me, seems like the best way of reducing people becoming kind of a bureaucratization, but also having people actually develop the skill sets to lead an organisation. Ultimately, we're developing a society where essentially, you know, it should be that anyone can theoretically organise and plan and you know, take up different roles in that society. It feels like to me like something that you kind of have to prefigure to some extent into the existing organisation. That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Steve. Soraya?
Yes, but I mean, it's an excellent question, Alistair, because the issue is getting down to the nitty gritty of how you have that democratic organisation. My thought, rotation of roles, including people who work full time, because the problem from the past, isn't it, is that you get people who get a role, they might be very good at it, but then they're always in that role, and the excuse is, oh, it's because they're good at it. And at the same time, I was taught when I was in various organisations, you know, you should be trying to develop yourself, understanding history, etc., and working to, the expression that was used was to sort of substitute yourself, so replace yourself, so that you would be discussing with somebody and then they'd take on a role. And I believed that, but in practice, it didn't happen because people were in these permanent positions, and you had, and you still have, as far as I know, people who've, I don't know, Peter Taff in the Socialist Party is still the General Secretary.
Yeah, Hannah Sells.
Okay, so took over after, what was it, 40 years?
50 years.
50 years. And that is just absurd. I don't care how good anybody is. It's what happens then is you get somebody, it shouldn't be, oh, well, somebody's great that they're good at the job, so now we'll get somebody else who's good at it. And if you have that right to recall, whatever we want to call it, that you're not sort of putting people in positions and then they stay in the positions. Because otherwise, I think it doesn't really matter how sincere they are or how good they are, but there then becomes a certain sort of raising of that person above the other members, and almost I've seen a reverence towards them, and that's not what they're there for. They're there because they're a representative in a particular moment, in a particular situation. But everybody, the whole point about representation is that it's a practical thing, isn't it? You don't have a room full of all the members, you have some of them, but that should not always be the same people. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just in terms of avoiding that control, because then people want to keep that position, they want to keep that esteem maybe that they get. Maybe it's correct that they've earned it. Maybe it's not correct, I don't know, but it shouldn't be that people are in positions for decades.
Maybe that ties in with what I was saying earlier about the reluctance of people to fuse their organisations because they lose their positions. I don't know. Richard Harris, good old Richard, keep them coming. He says, as Soraya was speaking, 100% on rotation of roles. The Athenian democracy used lots and worked. We must not allow bureaucracy to form. He's then followed it up with another comment. The Roman Republic had cursus honorum, consul for a year, then you're out. Great stuff, exclamation mark, doubled. Okay, anybody else? Nick?
Yeah, I think, you know, part of this work of coming together and talking to each other about what we require, which is, you know, a mass communist party, should also involve work and discussion and education around organisational forms, you know, thinking about what we have discussed at length about the various sects, you know, think about, you know, organisationally, why have they failed, why have they reproduced these unaccountable bureaucracies. So the type of organisation that we want to build, because all organisations need a bureaucracy, there has to be admin done, particularly when it grows to the size that we would hope to one day. But how do you subordinate that bureaucracy to the rank and file of that group? You know, how do you control the bureaucrats? And I think that's understand that is important to any new organisation to develop at a very early stage, because ultimately you know, communism is the fulfillment of extreme democracy, and a party that seeks to build that society should also seek to replicate that itself. When it's talking to the class, it should be practicing what it preaches in its own group. And that's also important in terms of avoiding splits, in terms of avoiding the abuse scandals that's been mentioned earlier, in order to develop on the wealth of talent from the class as it grows and it develops as well. As well as a lot we spoke about before, the challenges and the barriers that Ed spoke around, growing and self-reproducing itself, that all comes through democracy and building and retaining members in the organisation.
That's great. A very good question, Alistair, and something we need to keep coming back to. Any other points? I just throw in, I'm not going to turn the camera just for one point. I think it is important to have the propaganda out there, as well as approaching the Marxist left, the propaganda out there from new people, if possible. Actually 12 people on a demonstration, giving out one card, I think would make an impact. Something to think about. But it's got to be carefully done. We don't want to overreach, but we don't want to underachieve either. Okay, anybody else want to come in? Okay, so Richard just said 100% agree. The agree slipped out. Okay, thanks, Richard. I'm going to invite Ed to come back